Welcome to Black Expat Stories, the show where we dive deep into the experiences of Black people across the diaspora who have boldly decided to immigrate abroad in search of a better life. I'm your host, Courtney Bowden, and I'm a Black American writer who also took the leap of faith and moved overseas. I'm so happy to be back with you right here from my home in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. Join me on a virtual voyage to Lisbon, Portugal, where I'm speaking with Chrishan Wright, the founder of Blaxit Global. After her first life-changing trip to New Zealand opened her eyes to life abroad, Chrishan decided to turn her long-held dream of living overseas into a reality. Now, from her new home in Portugal, Chrishan empowers others to Blaxit through her podcast and online community. In our conversation, she gets vulnerable about what inspired her to share her own Blaxit journey publicly, the socio-political issues in the United States that informed her decision to leave, and why it's so necessary for Black expat stories to be captured and shared right now as history is being made. Chrishan also shares her bold vision for the Blaxit movement's evolution, the key role of community, and how Blaxit Global is shaping the future by changing lives every single day. I thoroughly enjoyed our time together, and I promise you will too. Here's my conversation with Chrishan Wright. Chrishan, your first trip abroad was to New Zealand, right?
Yes, it was.
From what I can understand, that was a really pivotal moment for you. Can you share one of the interactions that made you feel truly seen and catalyzed your decision to pursue a life outside the United States?
Ooh, it's hard to put like one interaction because what I loved about New Zealand and why it is my happy place is that the people, the Maori people, the Kiwi people were so kind and so welcoming. I came with my, Bronx armor on, ready for anything, and I was taken aback. And I had one host that I stayed with because I did Airbnb, and I wasn't sure since it was my first time out of the U.S. If I was ready to like be alone. So for a couple of the stays, I stayed in someone's home. And they were just so welcoming, made me breakfast and, gave me souvenirs. And one of my other hosts towards the end of my stay, they were like so concerned because I was traveling by myself, and they were like, "Oh, come over for dinner." And I had an issue with another Airbnb, and I asked if I could come over a day early, and they were like, "Sure." And they didn't even charge me for the extra day. And I was just like, "Oh my gosh." And so that really like made me believe that there are still good people in the world, because when you're in the States, and when you're not only just in the States, but you're bombarded with media that constantly is showing you like the worst of the worst, it's really hard to believe that there are still good things, that there are still good people, and that people don't have to walk around so guarded. And so when I felt that feeling, I was like, okay, one, I cried my eyes out the day before I had to come back to the States. But two, I was like, I want more of that feeling.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know why New Zealand was the first place you decided to go. Like, that's a whole world away. Was it a place you always wanted to visit and you finally got
Yeah.
there? What made New Zealand the first place that you started your travels?
I'm more of a go big or go home type of gal. But growing up in the Bronx, I grew up in Co-op City. Shout out to Co-op City. And I was very bookish as a little girl. And I don't know if it was a class or something I saw on TV or something, I read in a book or something. But I had this globe in my room, and I used to spin it all the time. And I'm looking at countries, Greenland and all these other places, the continent of Europe, the continent of Africa, and New Zealand. I don't know why, it just stuck with me. And I told myself, and I used to write in my journal, that when I was 26, I was going to become a corporate lawyer living in New Zealand. And I used to talk to my mother about it, obsess about it. And then, went to college, went to grad school. By the time I was 26, I had my son. And, those dreams of going abroad just fell in the recesses. And I didn't even pursue it when I was in college, even though I put myself through school. It just was one of those things like, it became like a dream deferred, really. And so fast forward, I had married my son's father. We had another child. Then we subsequently got divorced. And then I told myself another story like, oh, you know what? I know I want to travel the world, but financially, I was not in a position to do that, especially not having the second income. And I was like, oh, you know what? I'll wait till I find my boo and then we'll do this thing. And I used to go to the Jersey Shore. I was living in New Jersey at the time. And every summer I would walk the beach and, look at these couples and stuff. And, like, okay, one day, one day. And then one year I was like, I can be the hero in my own story. Why am I telling myself this? So literally, I packed up my stuff from the beach, got in my car, I can still remember this, and drove home, opened up my laptop, and I bought the ticket to New Zealand. And I said it had to be New Zealand because it was the thing that was on my heart ever since I was a little girl. And so I needed to make that happen for me.
Oh my gosh, I have like chills listening to that story because how often do we defer our own
Mhm.
dreams? How often do we tell ourselves stories that we have to wait until a certain thing is accomplished or a certain event happens in our life before we can do the thing that is really
Yeah.
calling us? And I can only imagine how that felt for you, not only purchasing the ticket, but then going through with the trip and experiencing this like life altering realization like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh. So, what made you say, this is the life for me? I have to leave the United States because a lot of people daydream about moving abroad. I talk to so many people who say, I've been thinking about it, but I need to wait until the kids are out of school, or I need to wait until I find my special person. But you turned that dream into a reality.
Mhm.
What inner convictions did you have to confront, or did you confront, that made you say beyond a shadow of a doubt that you were ready to make this
Yeah.
move? Even though you may not have made it
Mhm.
immediately, right? But what made you say, I'm serious about this? This is not just another goal or
Mhm.
another thing I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think it's because it was on my heart for whatever reason ever since I was a little girl. And then I had that experience in New Zealand, and then I've subsequently traveled to other countries. But I just knew, well, I should probably back up a little bit. I had made other attempts. So, when I was a child, I wanted to move to New Zealand, and then I became an adult, had my son, as I mentioned. And then I tried. I wanted to move abroad. I wanted us to move to Canada, and that didn't happen. And that was the first time actually that I realized that countries just don't let you in, and that you have to like have enough money to support yourself. So that's when I was like, oh, countries do means tests. Do you have enough money to sustain yourself financially? And at the time, 26 years old, newborn, that wasn't going to work. And then when 2008, 2009 happened, we were impacted by the financial crisis. And I remember a neighbor that lived on our street, they also were impacted. It was like five of us, like, all got let go. So we were outside in our pajamas, drinking coffee, like while the financial institutions were melting down. But this one family in particular that lived at the end of my street, they packed up, rented out their house, and they moved to Mexico with their three kids, I think it was two or three kids, for the year because they wanted to ride it out, lower the cost of living. And I thought it was so cool. And they didn't know Spanish, they just went. Then subsequently, I think they started teaching and things like that to provide for themselves. And I was like, oh man, I wish I could do that. But At the time, marriage was strained. We were in tons of debt. So that wasn't possible. And then after I got divorced and it was contentious, it was like, okay, this is definitely not going to happen right now. And so when I went to New Zealand in 2017, I just said to myself, like, I've got to make this happen. I've got to make this happen. And sometimes I think that it goes back to what I said about being the hero in your own story. Sometimes it does require you to be the one to pick up the gauntlet and say, this is what I want for myself. And for me, that was where I was rooted in my power and assuming responsibility and then charting out an intentional plan to get me to my goal. I knew my daughter was graduating. She's my youngest in 2023. And so I set that goal, that intention, the financial goals, and then made it happen.
Yes, you certainly did. And between that time and this, you started Blaxit Global. You started documenting your journey at the height of the pandemic. So, can you share what inspired you to take it a step further, to not just do this on a personal level, but to share that journey, that very personal journey more widely with other people?
Because I was crazy.
You know, I always say you got to be a little bit off
Yeah.
kilter in order to go through with this, because it is so counter to the things that we may have been conditioned to believe, the things that we've been taught about ourselves, about what we can do. So when you say that, I chuckle because I'm a little crazy too.
See, we got that in common. No, I mean, it is. It does require a little bit of that because, I had been doing this, moving in silence, like so many people now that I've been doing this for several years. And we have Blaxit Global has a community. And there are people that plan their move and move in silence, and they don't have the support. They don't have the connection. They don't have the resources. They don't have the family of origin or peer set that's supportive. I was that person. I did not have a supportive family that was behind me saying, oh, yeah, Krishan, yes, definitely do that. I didn't have friends that were like, oh, yeah, girl, I did this too. No, I also, despite the countries that I had visited, after New Zealand, with the exception of Iceland when I was on a trip, I had never met a Black expat. And so when 2020 happened, everything that was in 2020, I had just gotten back in February of 2020 from my second scouting trip to New Zealand. And I was between jobs at the time. I had ended my previous job and I was about to start a new job, I think later that month. And then 3 weeks into the job, lockdown happened and everything that followed, right? So everybody's disillusioned. Then you hear about, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of George Floyd, like these three significant murders in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of, at the time, was seemingly impacting Black communities, Brown communities disproportionately. And, the political rancor and all of that, and I was falling into myself. I was getting, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I'm an introvert by nature. And then add to the, I didn't mind that part of lockdown, not interacting with other humans. So I was like, oh yeah, it's my jam. Uh,
It was kind of refreshing to be in your own
yeah, it
energy.
was. I didn't feel that because I also had my daughter at home too. Um, but what I did feel was I did feel the loss of connection when we kept seeing and being inundated with visuals of us being murdered and closing into myself. and realizing that I was getting deeply depressed. And as the breadwinner for my family, and supporting my mom and my children, I knew that I couldn't allow myself to go further into that dark hole. And I had to be the one to pull myself out of it. And so I wanted to redirect that energy into something positive. As it was, a friend of mine who I met years prior through a statewide competition, she had a candle company, and I had an idea for a podcast. So it was like, come with a business or a business idea. And so she had a business, and I had a business idea. I wanted to start a podcast for women entrepreneurs. And we both placed as finalists. She won, I think, third place, and I placed. But then, that idea like went out the window. And then she subsequently started a podcast years later and was teaching, decided to pivot during the pandemic. That was like the word of the year, the pivot. And she was teaching
Yes,
podcasting,
indeed.
right? Remember that? The year of the pivot was 2020. And she approached me and she was like, "Hey, Chrishan, remember when you wanted to do that, podcast when we were in the Start Something Challenge? And I'm doing this class. You want to come on?" And I'm like, "I don't know, Kim." I'm like, "That ship done sailed. Like, what am I going to talk about?" And I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next day and I called her and I was like, "I know what I want to talk about. And I want to talk about Black people moving abroad." And she was like, "What?" And I said, "Look, I spend a lot of time in my head, and the two things that I'm laser focused about and obsessed with is my money and moving abroad." Right? So it was either going to be a podcast about how to get your money right or Black people moving abroad. And so I did, like I said, I only knew one Black expat that I had met in the wild. But I just started sliding in DMs of people that I had been like casually following and asked if they would get on the podcast and tell me their story. And much to my surprise and delight, they did. And the rest was history. It's history.
Now, at one point, you said you believe that Black people should not be the beasts of burden for the
Hmm?
US or any
Yes.
other land. That really stuck with me when I heard you say
Mm.
that. So, and I can tell you that when my husband and I were making the decision to move, we were the ones that were moving in silence. We told but a few people, but of the few people that we told, some of them were questioning us, like, well, why would you do
Mm.
that? And why Mexico? And why not stay to fight the good fight? So, what words of empowerment or advice do you have for those who feel kind of torn between leaving or, for self-preservation and staying to, fight the good fight, to contribute their gifts, their insights, their talents toward this liberation struggle?
Mm. Ooh, it's so much. I'm trying to think of where to start. So, first and foremost, moving abroad, staying or leaving is a personal choice. I'll just start right there. And then, second to that, is as Black people, there isn't a place that we can, if we have a calling on our heart and want to travel to and live, we should. We've been migrating this floating rock called Earth for centuries. And so I strongly believe that. When it comes to the decision in terms of, and I've heard this before around, the struggle and fighting, some people are, built for the fight, want to do the fight. But when we look at the generations and generations and generations that have fought this exact same fight, just at a different time, it starts to feel redundant. And we're fighting against
Yes.
now power structures. It's not the same fight. The wealth gap has grown exponentially. We also, when we look at our history from years prior and we think about land grants and other things, Black Wall Street, things that we had built that were dismantled, either allowed by the government or done by white supremacists and their allies, that was at a time when, even though we didn't have necessarily financial parity, it was it was still kind of like, I wouldn't even say it was even Steven, but when you look at it now with corporations having billions of dollars in their coffers, when you have politicians that have millions of dollars and interest groups and other things that behind the scenes are funding different regimes and different schemes to ensure that the power structure and the hierarchy stays where we are treated as second class citizens in a place of our citizenship and ancestry, that doesn't seem like a fair fight. And it isn't a fight that we willingly came into. We were extricated from our homeland and brought here. We don't have the story of coming through Ellis Island and our ancestors choosing to come to seek better opportunities in this land called the Americas, right? And then when you look at the beginnings of the history of America and what it did to those of indigenous populations, whether you look at Seneca Village, where Blacks and indigenous people were, when you look at all of the history in its totality. And then surprisingly, for a country that broke apart from Britain because they were being taxed like crazy. Fast forward to today, tax the hell out of all of its citizens. And we pay into, and we have paid for schools that we weren't allowed to enter, for businesses we weren't allowed to sit at tables. And now our tax dollars at present day are going to support wars in other lands where either genocides are happening, apartheid is happening, where countries where we're sending billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, our dollars, where we have different interests, or countries where they have socialized medicine, like Portugal, right? Where I know I walked away with thousands of dollars that I had paid for just getting basic treatment. I don't understand the rationale anymore. It's like being in the matrix and you take the pill. Now you've seen it. I can't unsee and I can't unlearn what I know. And so if there are people that feel that way, that's fine. But what I see is George Floyd was murdered in 2020. There is still no George Floyd justice and policing law. Legislation's been kicked around for several years, no different than the lynching bill that sat for many decades after the murder of Emmett Till. And even when there was evidence that showed that the woman was lying and they had a warrant and she was still alive, they didn't exercise it conveniently,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we think about John Lewis and all of what he did for us, the beating that he took on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during Bloody Sunday, fast forward to his death, and then his body is carried across that same bridge with that man's name still on the bridge. And we're having this conversation, and that man's name is still on that bridge. When we have our kids go to
Yeah.
school with names of the Confederacy, right? So, and what's going on in Florida. So, I mean, I could keep pulling up different reasons, um,
Right.
examples,
Examples.
and dossiers that they had on different leaders, and there was even a dossier on, I think it was Aretha Franklin or one of the other singers. I'm just like, again, you can't. You can't unsee it. And so for people that want to continue to say that and believe that, if that helps you sleep at night and get through the day, I'm not going to change your opinion, right? But for me and people who are like minded, I think the choice is clear that you don't have to, you own your life story, you own what you've learned. Your country doesn't own that. And we are past slavery. So America does not own me in no way, shape, and or form.
Wow. Powerful. That is a
For me,
powerful
the choice
statement.
is clear.
Same. And when we were making our decision, kind of weighing the pros and the cons, because I had to make this decision with another person, I had to make it with my
Mm-hmm.
husband. Um, I reflected on all of the instances of police brutality that I've had to witness and bear witness
Mm-hmm.
to just in my
Wow.
lifetime, just in our lifetime. I thought about Rodney
Mm-hmm.
King, right? That is the earliest memory that I
Mm-hmm.
have of police brutality being a subject of conversation. And hearing that verdict, right? And as got older, I was a little too young to see the tape when it happened, but just looking at the trajectory and how there had been no change, virtually
Yeah.
no change, not in the positive direction, because since that time, many of our police forces in major cities and even non-major cities have been
Mm-hmm.
militarized, right? They have been given more
Yep.
tools to enact
Mm-hmm.
violence and cause communities to feel uneasy with their
Mm-hmm.
presence. And I thought about where we were living at the time, which was in North Fulton County, Georgia. Anybody listening that knows what North Fulton County, Georgia is all about, you know what I'm about to say. Having my own experiences and run
Mm-hmm.
ins with the police, having police called upon my household by my neighbors for doing nothing wrong, right? And this had been happening my
Mm-hmm.
entire life after integrating two neighborhoods growing up in Michigan. So I think that what you and I both are saying is not only is the choice clear, was the choice clear for us, but um, our lived experiences informed that. It wasn't just a moment where it wasn't just you going to New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was the time leading your experiences in that country, in the United States, leading up to that
Yeah.
time. So often for us, it can be a process, a lifelong process of really seeing things, hearing things, and bearing witness to things that we can't unsee and we can't
Mm-hmm.
unknow. So thank you for offering that breakdown, because oftentimes folks may not understand our decisions and our choices on the
Mm-hmm.
surface. When we look at history, I just didn't see another
Oh
way.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, and just the examples I gave, that's just scratching the surface, right? There's so many
Mm-hmm.
um horrible, horrible things that have happened. And, I think about, Hurricane Katrina, Trayvon Martin, there were times where we've experienced things and there's like this initial shock, disbelief, disillusionment. And then sadly, we get back to, business as usual. We saw after everything that happened with George Floyd, we had as a people the international support. And then we went back about our days, right? So we saw corporations with their performative allyship, quasi investment in DEI, And for those of us who know and know better, we knew that it was, just something that was going to come and go and blow with the wind. And now, look, 3 years later, we're seeing DEI professionals, especially Black and Brown professionals, leaving the field because they were not supported, either resourced appropriately, didn't have enough power, had to toe the company line. We're seeing all of this pullback, especially with the potential changing of the guard with the next election, and this continued polarization, this censoring, this move towards fascism in the United States. You talked about the militarization of the police, and there's I see so many people that they're like, oh yeah, but if this happens, right, then that would be like my last straw. And it's like, I don't want to wait to become another hashtag for people to write about, comment about, and then again go business as usual. We can't be in the mindset of continuing to move the yardstick, right? We sometimes do it to ourselves. Oh, I just need another year. Oh, I just need 6 months. Oh, I just need, there are some legitimate time breaks, right? Like I took from 2017 to 2023 to make this move for a lot of personal reasons that I've already articulated. There are people, though, who are well resourced, have the talents, have everything, but lack either the community and the support and somebody pouring into them to say, you can do this. Sometimes it takes you hearing it and believing it. And maybe sometimes it's just hearing it, even if you don't believe it yet, right? To help you fortify yourself for the journey ahead. And that's what I feel like Blaxit Global, the podcast, and the platform has done.
That's why I admire you and what you have done, because you have created this community called Blaxit Global Passport, and it's full of resources, full of insights, trainings, tools that people can use to prepare themselves for their own move. How has building that community fortified your own decision? Because I also know there were 9 other people who were planning their moves to Portugal as well. So, how has this community supported one another and supported you?
Oh, wow. The community is fantastic. I know I'm biased, but Blaxit Global did start out as a Facebook group, and we got to about close to 9 or 10,000. And then I shut it off and migrated to Blaxit Global Passport. And that was largely because it was 9,000 of them, one of me, but also because I couldn't serve and show up in the way that I wanted to. I felt like it was just voyeurs, people want to kick the tires, but not people that were intentional about wanting to do it and really wanted to focus and put the effort in. And so I created Passport. And, we don't have 10,000 in there yet. But what we do have, we have engaged people. Some people come, one person in particular in our group, Karen, she didn't have a passport, had never left the country. And now she's traveled now twice to Mexico's already planning her move to Portugal. And it's just like, just seeing people, do that and know that it's possible. We've had people that are in their 70s come in the group. And, you talked about our Portugal accountability group. There were so many of us. And when you come in the group, you can put what countries that you're interested in. We've had people that this year moved to Thailand, previously last year, Vietnam. But this year was a lot of interest in Portugal. And because it was also the country I was moving to, created a smaller group for the Portugal movers. And then we had to kind of break it again a little bit more because there were so many moving in this year and wanted to support them in a different way than people had a longer timeline. But fast forward now, we all, those of us that are here, it was 9 members and their families. And so there's been 14 people now so far that have moved abroad this year, 13 to Portugal, and as I mentioned, one to Thailand. And it's just been wonderful to have also that built in community. It's fortified me in the sense that, I show up. Like, tonight we have our accountability check in, and, every month, showing up, getting the community's feedback in terms of resources, identifying where there might be common struggles, putting people in touch with things and different opportunities. And now, even being in Portugal, now that I'm feet on the street, like I've had, other ways that I've been able to serve. And so had some of our members that were just recently in a virtual summit that I co-hosted with our Black Utopia, the Move to Portugal virtual summit. Some of my Blaxit Global Passport members were speakers. I've also connected to people with job opportunities here in Portugal. And so, we had a freedom dinner last month to welcome all of us here. And it's something that I want to continue to do. And then also next year, we're also hosting a scout house for people who are interested in moving to Portugal and want to kick the tires and test it on, and try it on for size. And I'd be their host. So I feel like the way in which you can have a softer landing is by having the support of community, because community is going to get you through those days where you hit a roadblock, or that seems like it's a boulder, and then by the time you get all the love and support, you realize it's like it's only a pebble in my shoe, and then you're ready to take the next step forward. That's where I feel like having the community as an extension of the podcast and our other platforms really makes a difference, not only for me but the people who are part of it.
Community does make the difference, Krishan. And like I mentioned, my husband and I, we moved
Mm-hmm.
solo. And one of the things that informed where we ultimately ended up, which is here in Playa del Carmen, was community. Once we got plugged in, it was like, okay, this is a place for us. And when you do move to a new place, it doesn't matter whether it's out of the country or if it's just the next county or state over, you need people, and you need to be able to tap in to a wealth of resources and a brain trust to kind of help you orient yourself. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy that you've created Passport, because people come to me all the time and they're asking about, okay, well, where can I get resources? Where can I plug in with folks who are like minded, who want to make this move? And I'm telling you, Blaxit Global Passport is a place that you can explore. And I just love what you have done inside of that community and what you're continuing to
Thank
do.
you.
I'm curious to know how you ended up in Lisbon. I know that Portugal wasn't necessarily your first
No.
choice, but now it's at the heart of your Blaxit story. This is where you're starting your Blaxit journey. What unique qualities of this city, and more largely the country of Portugal, whispered to you that this is home for
Oh,
you?
wow. What a great question. So I mentioned my youngest. So she's off now in college. But at the time, she was home during lockdown, and her brother had moved out a few years earlier because they're 5 years apart, and he's in college in Ohio. And she was like, Mommy, I know you want to move to New Zealand, but while I'm in school, that's just too far. And I was like, okay, you know what? 28, 29 hours, that's fair. So I figured with the podcast and having, had such amazing and conversations with so many inspiring Black expats, I was like, okay, I've got like a basis to start from. So I looked at Costa Rica. I was thinking close proximity to the East Coast, the US. I did a scouting trip there. It wasn't what I needed based on, the life, being a digital nomad, having, my business be on the internet, just certain things in terms of my day to day that I needed that I didn't find there. And then it was off to Portugal. That was my second choice. And then my third choice, if Portugal didn't work out, was going to be Italy. And because I figured Europe was going to be like the next place for me if, Costa Rica didn't work because I figured, okay, you know what, going from Europe to the East Coast isn't that bad. I can get a direct flight. So I got to Portugal in April of 2022. Low expectations given the unsuccessful trip that I had in Costa Rica. And I also honestly didn't think that I would find a place that lit me up the way that New Zealand does. And when I got here, I was like, oh, this is different. Just seeing, Black people everywhere. I was like, okay, I did not see that in New Zealand. Um, Seeing Black people everywhere, hearing Black people that, I've been to other countries where Black people speak different languages, but just hearing the different dialects, because I am hearing Portuguese, but I'm also conversing with people from different parts of the diaspora. There are many countries represented here. And just to have that cultural exchange and interactions with people from Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, Angola, the list goes on and on. It was like, oh my gosh. And just to be welcomed. And also Black Americans that are here. But when I look at the country, it's a beautiful landscape, these big castles and the ease of living. The Portuguese people are very, been very friendly, especially with my limited Portuguese, even though I've been taking lessons. Um, just so welcoming, just different things that have happened. Even like when I flew here and I had my dog, and this Portuguese woman helped me out and got us through the airport and all this other stuff. It's just like, you don't know me, but people have extended themselves in ways, and like I said, very similar to my experience in New Zealand. And so when I think about like the culture, and also Eyes Wide Open, I've gone on Naki's tour, the African Lisbon tour. That was actually the first thing I did when I got here in 2022. I know that Portugal is the country that started the transatlantic slave trade, and going through and learning about the history, and then also learning too that, which I had already known, but Portugal's president had apologized for their role in the slave trade, which America has really yet to do. Um, and so just being here and being in a country that I feel at ease. It's one of the safest countries in the world. I think Portugal's number 6 or 7, usually jockeys between 3 to 7 every year in the World Peace Index. I don't have to worry about the guns, right? I don't have to worry about being in crowds. And these people like to party. So there are festive,
Much like the people here in
right?
Mexico.
And that's the thing. It's like,
It's
it is.
refreshing.
It's refreshing. And sometimes when people, and I'm sure you've heard that in Mexico, right? People talk about, oh, is it safe? The cartel and da 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 da, or the wages. And if it was so great there, why are they all coming trying to come here? They say that about Portugal. Oh my gosh, one of the poorest country in Western Europe. And then you see, and I'm not dismissing or trying to minimize these truths. Yes, there are low wages. Yes, Portugal is the poorest country in Western Europe. There's also people who, despite these truths, still find it in themselves to stay true to traditions. You get a smile and a bom dia and a boa tarde and a boa noite, and the festas, there's constantly festivals. They stay out all hours of the night. And the kids, and just seeing, usually where there's a playground, there's a kiosk, and the kiosk will sell like water and snacks and ice cream and wine and other things. And I was like, wow, I would have been a totally different parent.
Right? With wine and snacks at
Right?
the playground.
Every time I'm like, oh my gosh, and now every day I go to the kiosk, I walk the dog, we go, we sit, and I just, revel in that, seeing children play outside and not glued to devices. And just,
Oh my
it just
goodness.
brings me back. New Zealand as well as Portugal bring me back to that time in my life, that feeling of that time in my life where things were simpler, where I felt the support of community. And even though I'm still learning the language, every day I start to feel better, not just in my decision of being here, but every day, like I learn a new word or I can have a little longer interaction in Portuguese before, I either hit a wall or switch over to English. Like I feel like, okay, I'm taking the reins of this and I'm having this experience and it's beyond surface level. Like I really feel that I've
Yeah.
been welcomed here and I'm acclimating as a local and not an expat, even though that is my country of origin. I don't think anyone has ever asked me, with the exception of when I'm at the grocery store, because uh, they asked me like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I was like, "Oh, America." But in my day to day, very few people. I don't even think it's happened. Maybe twice that they've asked me where I came from. They just assume that you're
Mm.
Portuguese. Even Black people see me on the street and they're like asking me something and they're like speaking to me in Portuguese. And now I know enough where I don't have like that, deer in the headlights look in my eyes. But it's good to have that feeling like they're not like, oh, let me not ask her because she's not from here, you know. So for me, I want to spend more time, going and exploring all the beauty that Lisbon has to offer, all the way to, Madeira and the Azores, and been learning about the wines and whew, the wines. Um, and so it's been really, really great. And each day I get lost. Each day I make a mistake. Each day I get up and I also am in deep gratitude that I am living the life of my dreams.
Oh, and I could just, as you say that, I can feel the conviction in your voice. And it is so phenomenal to be living in the middle of your wildest dreams and your answered
Hmm.
prayers. And it's also healing.
Yes.
Of all the things that you said, one thing that really stands out to me is how your quality of life has been
Hmm.
elevated and simplified,
Hmm.
right? And how healing that is and it can be. When I talk to people and I share my experience living here in Mexico, and I get all the questions that you mentioned about the cartel and is it really safe, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell them, I feel the safest that I've ever felt. And I've lived in some of the best neighborhoods
Hmm.
in the States. But seeing kids playing outside and just all of those things and not having to bear the weight of your skin
Yeah.
color, right? And being discriminated against or targeted because of those things. It's those experiences, those day to day experiences that I believe are healing, not just the other
Hmm.
modalities that you might experience. So, in what other ways have you experienced personal healing, and how has your time in Portugal thus far shaped your view of the Blaxit?
Ooh, I've definitely embraced more of the soft life. So
Yes, soft life.
I jokingly said it was last summer I went to Bali and I, had like 3 massages in a week. We did a yacht day and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm the newest member of the soft life. And so,
Doesn't it feel
right. And
good?
then as I came here, I was like, okay, what are the things that I'm not doing anymore? And so I have a housekeeper that comes and cleans the house. I do have a dog sitter. I'm still working on a dog walker, but I have a dog sitter from when I travel. The apartment that I chose in part because it had this beautiful bathtub that I love soaking in, and just taking more of that. Like, it's been healing to go for walks. Now I do 10,000 to 13, sometimes 14,000 steps in a day on average.
Yes.
Whereas in the States, I'd be lucky if I were doing 3 to 4,000 steps in a day. So now that I eat clean food, not processed food, I have fresh juice every day, fresh squeezed orange juice. And, I don't have to look at the store where you see in the States, it would say like organic, and you're paying a premium for organic. I don't even see organic here. Like, it's just fruit and vegetables because
Right. It's a
it's
way
a
of
way of
life.
life, right? It's like, yeah,
Given.
it's fresh and you're getting it from, the farmer's market someone grew, or, things like that. And, the butcher, I go to a butcher who actually, cuts it, and, all these things, a fish person. And so that's been great, to eat clean food. I'm not feeling bloated. I definitely have mental clarity
Yes.
because, to your point, I'm not worried about microaggressions. I'm not worried about someone's interpretation of my body movements or appearance, or think, do I belong here? And, any of that. So it allows me and affords me the opportunity to have the ability to, have creative pursuits or just rest. I nap now every day, every day, every
Yes.
day.
And when your spirit is clear, your mind feels free. It's like those naps hit different.
Yes, yes.
We here at Black Expat Stories love to do what we call Ask an Expat, which is a segment where we ask our guests some of the most pressing and common questions we often get. So, Krishan, what's one thing you wish you knew about the expat life before making your move?
Ooh, that two-factor authentication was going to be such a pain in the butt.
How so?
Like, every time I turn around, sign into something, it's like, oh, we got to send a text message. And it's like, to my US number, which means I have to turn on airplane mode, switch on to my other phone. Like, it's like, so yeah.
Yeah,
But look, if that's the worst
they're
thing that I
trying to.
have to deal with, I think I'm doing all right.
Hey friends, I want to take a quick moment to let you know that if you want to dive deeper and unlock more of Krishan's advice and insights on expat life, then I encourage you to become a friend of the show. You'll unlock an exclusive extended interview with Krishan where she answers even more burning questions about her expat experience in Portugal. You'll also access other behind the scenes and bonus content you won't see anywhere else. Just head over to blackexpatstories.com/support to upgrade your access. Now, back to the show.
I've also gone out quite a bit. I've never gone out and eaten out this much in my life. I eat a lot of food, but yet I've been losing weight because like I said, it's not food that makes me bloated. It's not processed. These blackout shutters that are in all the rooms. Oh my goodness, the quality of my sleep has improved dramatically. I've also sought medical care. One of the first things that I wanted to take care of was some issues that I've been having with ringing in my ears and things like that. So I started seeing a doctor who then referred me to a physical therapist to correct the situation. And I'm like, what? And just the little manipulations has started to turn things around. And I went into the States before I left to deal with the same issue, spent hundreds of dollars, and was told, oh, you need to have a sleep study, oh, you need to get on this medication, oh, you need to have surgery, oh, you need to spend $6,000 on this and then do this. And I'm like, what? And they say, oh, you know what? You need physical therapy because the reason why you're having these issues is because you have a lot of tension. And I was like, what? Hmm. Just
Mm.
amazing, like just and this is interesting. So I've gone to the dentist my whole life. I'm not one that goes, oh, I gotta go, a couple years and don't go to the dentist. I always go to the dentist. And so when I went to this dentist in Portugal, and every time I've been doing this for several years, right? People say, oh, what's the healthcare system like in another country? I don't want to do this, because United States is the best. Okay, great. She looks at my teeth, does a mold, does all these things, tells me one of my teeth is actually one tooth in the back is actually turned backwards. And I said,
Oh, wow.
now how many?
And you've been keeping up your
Yes,
appointments. How many x-rays have you taken
in
in
my
the States that could
lifetime.
have told you the same thing?
Had orthodonture, I'm like, and sure enough, when she pointed it out, I was like, well, damn if it ain't. Right? And that whole thing with X-rays, two sets of X-rays, molds, and everything, 100 euros. And I'm like,
That's a
yeah,
copay
yeah,
if you're
yeah, yeah.
lucky. Yeah.
So I just, when I look at just in this short amount of time, all the things that have happened. I've had the opportunity actually last week. I was invited to a private reception and was able to see and meet the president of Portugal, and just things like that, like unexpected opportunities have just started to open up and to be in places and spaces, to make connections, to bridge connections, has been a wonderful, wonderful part of this Blaxit that I tell my members all the time, right? The closer you get to goal, the more you'll be challenged. But then when you get to goal,
Mm.
and even before, really, you have your plan of how you want. And I definitely say, like, think about your routine and what you want to do, just so that you're not like focused so much on the fantasy. After a while, it does become a day to day, but also leave space for the
Yes.
unexpected, leave space for the growth and the evolution, leave space for the change, because as you start to shed the weight of the life that you once had, or societal expectations, or conditioning, or anything, you have yet to then meet this new part of who you are and your identity and your new lived experience as you embark on this next chapter.
I'm glad you talked about conditioning and shedding because I know that mindset is a cornerstone of your
Mhm.
philosophy. And as it should be, I think that we don't talk about mindset enough when we discuss moving abroad and adapting. And so I'm curious to know how you've been able to shift your mindset so that you could successfully make your transition to Portugal.
Ooh, a lot of, that's a great question. Yeah, I had to like think about things in a different way for sure. I had to. I said I've given up my bus pass on the struggle bus because as someone who is used to pride herself on being super independent, I realized that that was also rooted in trauma. So this like hyper vigilance
Yes.
and hyper independence was also a way to sometimes create space between me and others, for fear of disappointment, in whatever shape or form that was. Um, and so there's been a part of me that's had to do some shadow work as part of this move and understand without judgment that there were and are aspects of my identity, my personality, that have come into being that served me at a particular moment in my life that I may have held on to for too long that doesn't then serve me in this next version of my life, this next chapter. And so I've had to honestly look at things and say, okay, where did this come from? Is this serving me? And is there an opportunity to think about this differently or do it better or different? And so that's where the mindset shift has been, is to take an honest critique and really pull back the onion layers and dig deep. Sometimes you do that work. Oftentimes when you do that work, you have to come to terms with things that have been buried and dormant for years, intentionally or unintentionally, and realize that in any scenario, right, there's two people. So there's not all right and there's not all wrong. And so just looking at different pivotal moments and just saying, okay, you know, this may have served me and this helped me get out of a situation or helped me get into a situation, but is this serving me or is this holding me back? Is this something that's going to allow me to propel myself and my life forward? Or am I doing things to self sabotage? Am I intentionally or unintentionally trying to clip my own wings in whatever scenario that is? And so, what I challenge people to do is to, you know, preferably do this with a therapist, but, you know, to start, you know, little by little, incrementally getting yourself and your mindset prepared for this journey because this moving abroad requires that you open up. And for many of us, that level of vulnerability is scary as hell, right? For a variety of
Yes,
reasons that
yes.
we've articulated and some that we haven't. And so, again, where you want to get to that next level is going to require you to have to show up in a different way. And so when you do that shadow work, when you do the behind the scenes and the mindset work, it prepares you for that. And it's a continual process. It's not like I journal and tell myself an affirmation and I'm like, I'm good. It's a intentional revisiting of things because you will be in different situations and encounters where you might show up really well and then the next time not so great. And so again, without judgment, it's an opportunity to examine and to learn and best outcome to grow.
Absolutely, Krishan. And that work has to happen before you
Hmm.
move. It has to happen. And I'm so happy that you took the time to share your healing journey and to share the ways that you've been able to shift your mindset to make this move successfully. And I think that it's going to encourage so many people to start that work if they haven't already, but to also continue it because when you do finally arrive wherever you're going to land, wherever you've decided to move, to your point, that work does continue. One of the benefits, though, I think, of moving that I found has been having that space to interrogate and to explore and to connect with myself and
Hmm.
others. And that in itself is just so transformative. I'm not the same woman that I was when I left 2.5 years ago. And even in the 2 months that you've been in Portugal, I'm sure you can say the
Oh
same.
yes, this is new me. It's like who that?
Right, new me,
Who
who
this?
this? Now, Krishan, the Blaxit movement is gaining momentum. You have a front row seat of that. I believe that we're both pioneers in that
Yes.
regard. How do you envision the future of this movement evolving, and what role do you see Blaxit Global playing in shaping that trajectory?
Ooh, I mean, you and I have both said this is that this Blaxit movement really is, well, one, a movement. I say that in the podcast, right? You've heard the term now be inspired by the movement. We've both said that this is the next great migration. This is one that is going to be in the history books. And, whether I, or others are in those chapters, much like, luminaries that have come before us that have paved the way. I think that is the part that is the most inspiring, is that, when we think about people like Josephine Baker and James Baldwin, um, when they were living their lives, I don't think that they realized that they were, paving the way for people like us to come decades later, and then, really have this movement, have this pull for us to seek opportunities elsewhere. Um, so for me, when I think about like what the movement can do and how it can grow, I think it's going to inspire so many people, like it already has. But I think there are other things that are going on, particularly in the United States, that I feel like in this next year to 2 years is going to propel the Blaxit movement exponentially. Right now in the States, we have a Democratic president. Previously, we had 45. Um, and now,
The one who shall remain
exactly,
nameless.
who shall never be named. Um,
Not on this
never be
platform, at
named.
least. We're not
Never,
amplifying that.
never. Um, and yet today, I read that they being the previous administration, are leading in the polls against the current administration, despite a insurrection. And
Despite
and
felony
exactly, I
charges.
didn't even get to that part, right? Like, and I'm perplexed by that, as well as the stats that indicate that the biggest gains that this person is getting is among Black Americans. I just
Wait a minute. Hold up. Wait. Okay. I've been keeping my finger on the pulse of things as well, but I did not know that data point. I wasn't aware of that.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Yes, I understand and I share your
Yeah,
perplexed nature.
yeah. So I'm just like, do I file this under all skin folk and kinfolk? Is it a combination of that and people who, because this person's name was on their stimulus check, felt like, oh, they did something for me? I don't know. But, you know, even despite that one, as I mentioned earlier, the US and its involvement in these proxy wars uh, is not something that, many Black Americans are aligned with. Not to mention inflation and all of the issues related to the economy. So what we find is there are people who are seeing this potential mashup as two sides of the same devil and pulling out of the political discourse entirely, inclusive of opting not to vote. Um, And so, what that does is that it makes it easier for people who have conflicting interests, right, to continue to erode democracy. But at the core, we have to look at history. And when we look at comparisons, because we've talked about fascism and all of that, and the similarities to even Hitler and how he came into power, it's, first erode your beliefs in first othering people, and then, oh, the media, no, can't trust them, right? And so you're just seeing like the same playbook. And what I say about America is that it is great at optimization. Where we are today and how we're having this conversation about the same things that our ancestors have done. It's it being present day, the oppression that we feel, the discrimination that we feel, despite different backgrounds, different parts of the world, different everything, right? How different fields, education, the list goes on and on. How are we all singing the same Negro spiritual? And so you have to look at it and say that for those of us who now have the differences and I guess the improvements being we have access to technology, the ability to communicate and share information and resources. And again, one of the reasons why Blaxit Global Passport is a private community off social media is because of the content suppression that happens when Black and Brown people try to stand up and express what is going on in our
Say that.
experiences. We have our content suppressed, and so I did not want to continue to compete and fight with Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or any of these other platforms. Right, the work is too important to do that. To also have it for fodder and anything else that people want to try and pick apart. And so when I think about the evolution of the Blaxit movement, I think that there is, these, discrete communities and channels where people will be able to make those connections, to fortify themselves, to do the journey steps, to then bring their families, that then changes the trajectory of generations, where we talk about opportunities like generational wealth. And, we've talked about things like Black excellence and, all the things that we do as the global majority, as, culture shapers and everything that is our essence and being. I feel like this movement is only going to grow as people realize that safety can be a part of their life and the lives of their children and grandchildren, that economic prosperity, that the ability to have a healthy body, right? That time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom is something that can be afforded to us. And we don't have to be beasts of burden and bear the weight of so many things and live in a society that whenever we get to a certain point that the yardstick continues to move and it's like, no, oh yeah, they said 1 million, oh now you need 10, right? Oh yeah, you want to get a house, oh no, that's like 600,000. So now people are able to say, hey, I can move to a different part of the world for part of a year, for full time. I can move to different countries. I can start a business. I can pass that business down. I can just relax and enjoy the fruits of my
Yes.
labor. You have agency. And the more in which we see Black people in particular having that agency, that in and of itself threatens the establishment. And so right now we're, I think, in the sweet spot where, those of us that have the gumption, that have the connection and resources and support to do it, we'll do it. And the more that we do that, other people will say, hey, wait a minute, how did you do that? It's possible because we know representation matters. And so the more that they see
It does.
us and hear conversations and say, hey, if they could do it, that means I could do it. And that there is no difference. And that in a world, in a society, in a culture that enjoys trying to separate us and pit us against ourselves, that we can come together in unity and say, this is what we're doing and you can do it too, that's what's going to propel this movement well beyond, I think, our lifetimes.
I completely agree, Krishan. And, I always say that the Blaxit is not a moment, it is a
Hmm.
movement, and it is something that will endure. And with every movement is come
Hmm.
sacrifice, right? Freedom requires sacrifice. We know the sacrifices that our ancestors and those who came before us made for us to even be here. We stand on the shoulders of
Hmm.
giants. What are some of the tangible and intangible sacrifices you've made to achieve your version of freedom?
Ooh, I mean, in present day, I'm in Europe. I don't have any family members here on this continent, let alone in the country. Uh, and so my kids are in the States. They're over 3,000 to 4,000 miles away, as is my mom. And there's going to be, things that I'm missing. Next week is my immigration appointment. So I'm not going to be able to go back to the States for Thanksgiving. So I won't have my residency card in time. Um, and making those new connections, right? So coming here, making some Portuguese friends. Definitely have missed some of my favorite foods. So if you are planning to come to Portugal, please bring grits. um,
Okay, everybody has to bring grits to Mexico too, so we're not alone in
right?
that.
Ain't too proud to beg. Ain't too proud to beg. Um, and so, yeah, there's creature comforts, right? There's the familiarity that's gone. I go to a store and I don't know any of these brands, so every day I pick up something. It's learning, right? Um, but for the things that I have lost, absent family, of course, I've gained so much more. And then, actually, last night, my brother bought his plane ticket. So he's coming to visit me early next year, as is my daughter. And so, just dispelling those myths like, oh, you think Europe is so far away. And it's like, it's a 6.5 hour flight out of Newark. Right. And it's like, oh, it's like no different than going to
Right,
California. And so
right.
it's like when you're able to demystify a lot of it and then also think about the things that I have to look forward to, like the ability to travel within the EU. And there's countries that I want to visit. Actually, next month I'm going to Italy. And then it occurred to me today, it was like, oh, you know what? I can go to Greece. It's like I enjoy going. I've been to Greece, in 2019, and just things like that. And so the things that I've given up, I think I gave up the things that I needed to. And then, the things that I still cherish, which is family. I can always hop on a plane like I did 3 weeks after I moved here. I went back for my daughter's 18th birthday. And, that's always there. That's always there.
Yeah. So it sounds like the sacrifices that you have made have made the journey worth it thus
Hmm.
far for you.
Oh, yeah.
Happy to
Thank
hear
you.
that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that. I feel the same way as well. And you've accomplished a lot, especially being one of the pioneers of the Blaxit movement. Of all the things that you have accomplished, what are you the most proud of when you reflect back on your journey?
Ooh, the lives that I've helped change, whether it be people that I know personally or in Blaxit Global Passport community or been on the podcast or any of our other platforms. But then those emails that I get from people who are, either on the mailing list or who I meet, when I'm walking about, to realize that the decision to move abroad and then to be public about that move when I'm very private and introverted. There's no way I could have conceived that this was so much bigger than me. To hear that, I'm a pioneer, trailblazer in the movement is humbling. And I'm in deep gratitude because I know the magnitude of that when I see families come and I'm meeting, oh, I want you to introduce you to my daughter, my granddaughter, and because of you, and I'm hearing these stories and I'm just like, wow, when I was, preventing myself or trying to prevent myself from having a nervous breakdown, and I'm grabbing a mic in my closet and I'm getting up early in the morning to have a conversation with someone who's in 13 hours time difference, right? And just, making these connections and, scheduling these meetings and doing all these things, that there are people on the other side who were able to have the ability to make their dreams a reality just by hearing me have a conversation or coming into the community. The weight of that, like the feeling of that, is just, it's beyond words. I'm in deep gratitude, and every day I don't take it for granted. I do not take it for granted.
And Chrishan, I've said this to you a few times off camera, but I need to say it to you here right now. Thank
Mm,
you for having the courage and the foresight to document your journey and to create a space where others can have a conversation about what life can and does look like outside of the United States.
mhm.
And, your journey has also inspired me as I've journeyed on in these 2.5 years living abroad. And I believe that you will continue to do that. And I'm excited to see all the ways that you will with Blaxit
Thank
Global.
you.
So before we get out of here,
Mhm.
where can folks connect with you and keep up with your journey online? So where can folks find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram, find me on YouTube at Blaxit Global. Our website is blaxitglobal.com. You can come into Blaxit Global Passport, which is our private community. As I mentioned before, we'll have our scouting house, Nomad Noir, in August of 2024, as well as a meetup in Portugal in June. And yeah, hit me up when you're in town. Let's meet for coffee. Say hi.
Well, I hope to be one of the ones that will be doing that soon because Lisbon is definitely on my radar. I've been hearing some amazing things about it. One of my good friends is planning her move to Portugal as well. So I hope she listens to this episode because you have given us so many incredible insights. Thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for making the time to chat with me today. And I look forward to all the amazing conversations that I hope we'll have in the
Thank
future.
you. This was a great opportunity. You asked amazing questions, very thought provoking, very thoughtful. And I look forward to us meeting in person one day soon.
One day soon, because I want to have another conversation with you on camera, the way that we do our usual Black expat stories episodes, because I know by the time I get over there, I'm sure you'll be acclimated and you can, highlight some of the places that you love to go, the places that you love to eat,
Hmm.
and the folks that you've met there.
I eat. I eat.
Same. I'm a foodie. I'm a foodie. Chrishan, thank you again so much for taking the time. I know that we kind of went over,
Okay.
but this has been such an inspiring and insightful conversation. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for listening and watching as we continue exploring the journeys of Black expats finding freedom, healing, and belonging across the globe. Are you feeling inspired to embark on your own expat journey? Hit subscribe to join the conversation and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Black Expat Stories for sneak peeks and more expat insights. Now, if these conversations resonate and you want to help this platform grow, then I encourage you to become a friend of the show. Not only will you enjoy early ad-free access to new episodes, exclusive bonus content, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, you'll also be supporting our mission to amplify the voices of the pioneers at the vanguard of the next great migration. Just head to blackexpatstories.com/support to join our growing community. However you choose to connect, keep your passport ready and your dreams without borders. Until next time, I wish you peace, love, and passport stamps.